Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR podcast brought to you by racefortheprize.com. Let's look for value picks for Sonoma. Point per dollar picks. Those place differential guys that fill out the majority of our fantasy lineup. Yes, of course, you're going to want to see practice on Friday. And you're going to want to look at that data, which you will get in the Fantasy NASCAR Spreadsheet, Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, and you can look at every single lap. You're going to want that. But track history is going to matter. And we have track history. Price matters for determining who the value is going to be. And we have that. And we can do that work now. We can highlight specific drivers so that when you do have some practice data and you do have the starting position, you'll know which drivers to key in on. As for the elite expensive drivers, we'll wait more towards Sunday morning to go through that. You're going to want to see starting position. You're going to see laps and really overanalyze those. But as far as value, guys that are in that top 25-ish range that we've mentioned in previous podcasts, that can sneak into the top 10. You can see on the screen, in any given race, a different driver is in the green. Any of these guys in the top 25 can knock on the door of that top 10, get enough finishing position points, get a dozen place differential points, and end up being an optimal lineup or a winning lineup driver. We can get an idea of those by doing our homework now so you can focus on your hogs later this week. So again, elite drivers, we'll skip past them. That's for the weekend. Today we're talking about who are our place differential plays. Who are the drivers within striking distance? The drivers that can run around the top 20, top 15, let the race come to them. They limit the mistakes. We're not necessarily chasing top finishes. We just need them to start around 20, sneak into the top 10, which they are all more capable of doing. And we want to look at those drivers and make cases for each or cases against each. And possibly, we're looking at different stats. We're not necessarily looking at how many times Todd Gilliland got into the top 10. Maybe we're looking at people who are consistently staying in the game, and their time is coming. Maybe we'll even look at top 15 percentage laps. If we look at laps run inside the top 15 at the road courses, that tells us they're consistently staying in the game. Maybe their time hasn't come yet, but they will, or maybe their time has come, and they are the drivers that we want, and the drivers that DraftKings possibly undervalued. So let's do that. Let's get our plays. Again, we're skipping past the elite, and I don't even know if Hamlin's elite, but if you do look at Hamlin, last year he was running in the top 15, and if he were to mess up qualifying, then yeah, despite his finishes not being great at road courses lately and him seemingly giving up on road courses, the race could come to him too. But let's move to Ty Gibbs. And these first drivers that we'll talk about are the fringe elite. And I'm pretty close to placing Gibbs in that elite category. You think of all the Xfinity Series success he's had at road courses. I know the competition's not that great, but he did what he was supposed to do. And then you throw in the simulator theory and the fact that they're driving with eyes and visual stimuli that can be simulated on video games. Again, that's another advantage for these little guys, young guys. So I don't think the experience gap is as wide as it used to be. And you can check out that previous podcast where I really go into detail about how the competition gap has shrunk. And although we're probably not going to see any of these guys break through and get wins, especially the guys at the back of the top 25, they can get top 10s, whereas in the past when we only ran at Sonoma, Watkins Glen, it was very rare for them to get into those races in the top 10. And again, going into that experience gap with Gibbs, you compare him to a guy like Truex. Truex has millions of laps at ovals. Those all require feel. You need real life experience. There is a real gap there. Truex also has a lot more road laps in real life than Ty Gibbs. But sim laps, I would argue, are comparable and make up for that gap. And in theory, and you don't have to agree, but in theory, the experience gap is much smaller at the road courses than at the ovals. And then another thing I want to mark for Gibbs, although this was part-time work in 2022, he ran pretty well in 2023. He's up there fighting. 100% of his laps in Chicago, 100% Watkins Glen, the Roval, Coda. We're seeing clear growth. Now, you want to put him in elite yet? Maybe not, but he's in the conversation. I don't really need to say anything about AJ Allmendinger. We know that he is a solid race car driver. Stats back it up. Again, you can see on the screen, if you look at last year, 92% of his laps on median were inside. Again, this is a median, so we kind of throw that out. We're inside top 15. That ranks third. If we look at when he was running around the top 15-ish, that was in 5 of 6 races. So right here we can see in 5 of the 6 races, he's in the top 15. That's striking distance. That's the top 10. Now, for Allmendinger, he likely is going to start up front, and he doesn't really provide us all that much value. But again, just going over the drivers that you are going to consider. And you could argue that maybe he is a little too cheap. I mean, 7 races in striking distance. 4 races in striking distance. 5. 1 for 1 this year. Buescher, 8,600. Way too cheap. And a lot of this has to do with betting markets. DraftKings sets the pricing based on who's going to win. The betting market doesn't think he's going to win. That influences the price. But we're playing DFS. We're chasing top 10s and place differential, not wins. And that's exactly what he does. You look at top 15 laps. Last year, 6th when we do the rankings. Or 9th when we do the rankings here. 8th when we do the rankings here. Last year, all 6 races, he was in a spot that I'm very happy with. All 6 races, he was in the game. I'm looking for steady, consistent approaches. Buescher is incredibly undervalued. He may not win, but he's up front long enough that he can get a top 10. He can even top 5 it. I like what he offers. I really do. I think he's undervalued. McDowell also, again, too cheap. And I know we've gotten McDowell at 6,000 in the past, and those were just mistakes. But 8,500 is still pretty low for a car that is much better these days. A driver that seems to be much better these days. And it's not a complete mistake, right? The price is based on, will McDowell win? Probably not. And so the price is $8,500. Win bet odds. But again, we're not betting to win. We're looking for safe top 5s and top 10s. He's 11th in salary, but he is 4th in top 15 percentage. Pretty solid. He's running up front for most of these races. Look, last year, 5 times, 88% on median, inside that striking distance range, ranking 6th. Back in 2022 on median, 90% inside the top 15. That's practically the entire season. He's in striking distance in 5 of the 6 races. Move on to Ross. Again, too cheap. You want to add another factor that may say he's too cheap? He was in the tire test. He participated in the tire test at Sonoma. He's got more notes. Now, there is a problem with possibly Ross Chastain and McDowell this weekend or any given weekend. And that may say, all right, these prices are actually fair. And that's that Ross Chastain and Mike McDowell, maybe even Buescher to that extent. But definitely these 3, more so than some of the other drivers we'll mention, they're all chasing wins. And if your approach is to win, then you're going to need to pass to win. And as I mentioned earlier in previous podcasts, we want drivers that are going to limit mistakes. And a way to limit mistakes is just to follow the line, stay in the pack, so to speak, and just follow the guy in front of you. Don't do anything stupid, like, I don't know, trying to pass cars. Because if your goal or ambition is to win, then you do have to pass cars. And that's when mistakes can happen. You lose a spot in the battle, you spin out, you overcook a corner, you run into the newly created wall in turn 11. Awesome. We want safe and slow and steady top 10s. And that may not be Ross Chastain. That may not be Michael McDowell. They also may qualify towards the front. And if so, great. That probably eliminates them from the conversation, and you don't have to sweat that way. I think the perfect example of the approach that we want, he's not on the screen, but if you look at Kevin Harvick over the last couple seasons, he knew he wasn't going to win. His days had come and gone. The field had improved. His car was no longer there. So Harvick went out there and just tried to maximize points. He just went for safe finishes, got his weekend over. And he was in quite a few optimal lineups over the last couple seasons, despite not really being fast in practice or qualifying, just going out and doing a day's work. We're looking for a driver that has a similar approach, who's not trying to make a name for himself, not trying to change his career. Go get some points, let's go home. Let's go back east. Or at least to Iowa. Probably go to Charlotte first before going to Iowa. I don't know. Maybe a week in Iowa could be fun. Any Iowans out there, let me know how that works. Let's move on to Cindric. So Sonoma was a terrible race for him last year. And we could overreact to one single race. And that's fine. 0 in the top 15. And just absolutely ran around 25th the entire race. Even further back. Just did not have the car. Did not have the day. And we could overreact to that one Sonoma race. Or we could say, hey, in his rookie season, pretty freaking solid. 6th when it comes to running in the top 15. That's striking distance. Yeah, last year was rough. We'll see how it goes. But again, we know what he did in Xfinity Series. We know his pedigree. At 8,200, it's appealing. Move on to Daniel Suarez. So possibly he's going to be able to take advantage of his teammates' testing notes. We look at Sonoma 2022. He won this race. Pretty good in 2022. Not quite able to replicate it. We know the skills are still there. He's got a win in his back pocket. Maybe that allows him to chase points as opposed to I need to win. And if I'm looking at drivers who are desperate for wins, Buescher, McDowell, Chastain, more likely to chase a win than Suarez. Suarez is cheaper. Suarez has the same skills, similar skill set, has demonstrated that he can run within striking distance. And although this hasn't been the greatest season for him at the ovals, this is definitely a good bounce back spot. Ryan Blaney, not very interested. Pretty good in 2022, not so good last year. Overall, his results haven't been great. Wait and see how his practice goes. But if we're just looking at data and we're kind of trusting our own general feel for these drivers, you don't like it. Kyle Busch, Alex Bowman, Logano, I would suspect these drivers are going to be very popular. Again, we're looking for a driver that's going to start around 20th and get a top 10. And if I said road course for Busch, Bowman, and Logano, then you know we're not really chasing a exotic place differential play. These are not stretches. They should all be very popular based on our general knowledge of these drivers and clearly based on the stats. Busch is getting the top finishes, although I don't have them on the screen. But running inside the top 15, yeah, he's there. 5 of the 6 races last year, he was there. Not as many in 2022, but you have to remember that the JGR Toyotas struggled the first year of the next gen at the road courses. RCR, good deal. Coda, good deal. Alex Bowman, for whatever reason, we have a hard time believing he is good at road courses, but the data simply doesn't lie. He knows what he is doing. He is a good road course racer. Is he elite? No. Is he better than $7,500? Yes. Can he get a top 10? Absolutely. Will he be within striking distance at Sonoma? Absolutely. Joey Logano, the same can be said for him. He's doing exactly what we need him to do. It's not flashy or fancy. He's capable of running around 15th, letting the race come to him. 5 of the 6 races last year, he was in a spot where he could slide into the optimal lineup. Like it? I like it a lot. Those are the 3 guys that I'm really, really excited. And then you could also make an argument that maybe this is just a slow start for Logano back in the first of the next gen era. But then he clearly starts to step up a little bit and then improve last year. Brad Keselowski. on the other hand, is a driver that is not making us feel comfortable. He is not running within striking distance. Now, he could slide in from one race to another if you go back to Sonoma in 2022. But for the most part, he's not giving us what we want to see. He's not in the fight as often. And as we go down, we're going to see more of these drivers not be in the fight as often. And look, last year, when we look at, is he in this 60% range, running around the top 15? Is he running within the top 15 in these races? No. In none of them. He doesn't make it over the margin at all. Closest he comes is 47% of his laps around the top 15. I'd like for you at least to be in that 60% range. Briscoe got it done once. Very good in 2022. Numbers drop off significantly. What could explain that? Well, SHR has gone backwards. And we did see him run particularly well in the next gen car when it first was implemented, and he seemed to have a little bit of an advantage for whatever reason to the rest of the field. Field came back to him. Another added problem that we're going to run into is he going to push? Briscoe and the rest of the SHR lot are in a pretty tough position. They're fighting for their lives. They're all trying to get jobs. Briscoe could be too aggressive, and that aggression could lead to more mistakes. And we want someone who's not necessarily going to go out there and try to win. If we have to compare him to some of these other cheaper drivers who are likely going to be starting further to the back, one of the differentiating factors is going to be who's going to do less stupid stuff. And maybe stupid is the wrong word. Who's going to be less aggressive? Briscoe's clearly going to be more aggressive. Now, that could increase upside. But I don't really need you to go to 10th to 7th to 6th. I just need you to get to 10th. I need you to get over that mark. I need you to score around 48 fantasy points. I don't need a home run. Double's great. Just get on base. He's going for a home run. Gilliland's not going for a home run. Just going to get on base. Now, obviously, his numbers have not been there. But he has gotten some top 10s in the past. And he has finished these races. We look. We would like to see more steady performances, but his days have come. He has gotten there. And he has some other solid finishes. Not really that one, but at least top 20. That's not really a strong defense of Todd Gilliland, nor am I trying to make one. And if you want to say, oh, well, he's pretty good in some truck races at road courses, and he absolutely was. But the Truck Series doesn't run that many road course races. And he skipped the Xfinity Series, and he didn't get as much reps as these younger drivers in the Xfinity Series, where you're running a handful every season in your development. He got a couple. So sometimes we might exaggerate his Truck Series experience. It's probably detrimental that he mainly ran Truck Series. Go to Bubba. See, you're right. Is he within striking distance often? And there's a couple really good ones. And the rest not so much. And that worries you. And we see him consistently outside top 15. That leads us to believe he is consistently making mistakes and not staying in the game. And if he didn't stay in the game in those races, then what's the turnaround going to be? I don't really need you to necessarily have top finishes. At the very least, from these drivers down here, I want to see them up into like the 40% consistently. Like, all right, maybe you're not yet ready to be up here in this category with Busch, Bowo, and Logano. But if you're consistently just outside of the top 15, the next step is that you will be inside the top 15. And once you're inside the top 15, the race comes to you, you play a stage right, you get the win, you hold position. Haley did not do it last year. He did do it in 2022. Did do it 71% at COTA. That is very interesting. Not a big data set. He wasn't a bad road course racer in the Xfinity Series. Yeah, those 23 numbers were terrible. But he had a good COTA this year. Decent COTA in 2022. Not a lot of experience in Sonoma, I get that. Is it possible that Rick Ware is... Obviously, they're putting more money into this car. Rick Ware has a crazy stable of racing. He races everything. but they do have Indy cars. They do know road course racing. Maybe that's helping. I don't know. Again, we would love to see these numbers be bigger, but that was a different season. Now, you look at Austin Dillon. This is very appealing. So when we're talking about not running in the top 15 yet, but possibly soon, he was pretty good in 2022. Close to getting in the striking distance. We look at last year. He's not completely out of it. He's putting some laps in inside the top 15. He's not there as much as we want, but if he was there as much as we want, then his price would be much higher at $6,300. He's very appealing. Would you be shocked to see Austin Dillon at Sonoma running 15th to 20th? No. And then, the way a caution comes out or whatever, he slides in. He's not going to go out there and try to win. He can't win this race. But he can get a top 10. He can patiently get there. And 6,300, pretty decent deal. We don't have any data from Gragson because he wasn't around. He does have plenty of experience in the Xfinity Series. Someone to watch. But again, with Gragson, similar to what we have seen with Chase Briscoe, he's already a pretty aggressive guy. And now you're going to see extreme aggression from Gragson moving forward as these drivers try to make a name for themselves and try to get a job next season. I don't know if Gragson has anything lined up, but clearly he's going to go out there and try to do something more than he probably should. And again, if we're looking at aggression, just comparing Gragson and Dillon, who's going to be more aggressive, who's fighting for their life, it's Gragson. And when you put him in that situation, you put him in the corner, sure, Gragson may have more upside. But it's more likely that he overcooks a corner. It's more likely that he gets into a battle with somebody and loses spots. Nemechek, another driver with not a lot of road course experience. Although he think he's running this weekend at Sonoma. So we'll see with that. Again, no real data here to look at. Jones, very worrisome. And we can make an argument that says possibly, we see that he didn't run in the top 15 hardly at all last year. And he had, obviously his JGR data is going to be great. And it hasn't been that bad with RPM, legacy, But last year was a real drop. Now, an argument for why we see Jones not running last year in the top 15 very much would be that this was a lame duck team. And as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, simulator time matters. And from my understanding, as soon as Jones and Legacy Motor Club made the switch to Toyota last year, or announced it, they were limited their Chevy resources. They were limited manufacturing time, wind tunnel time. And so if Jones got fewer laps in the simulator, and simulation matters for road course racing, that could be one of the possible causes. You can also throw on top of that with Jones having the back injury. If that's going to flare up, or if you are still concerned about him getting healthy, this is going to be a real test for him. It's not going to be the most comfortable day for him. You want to downgrade him because he's not 100% healthy. I don't completely disagree with that. Josh Berry did participate in the test. Does have a couple seasons of Xfinity road course racing. Late model guy that we don't necessarily consider a road course driver. But they sent him out there in that tire test for a reason. Not sure what that reason was. Briscoe is probably your preferred road course racer in that stable. But anyway, Barry went out and did the tire test, so he has some notes. Probably a stretch because you're not really leaning on much data. But at 5,800, they'll likely start deep in the field. His team, like I mentioned before with Kevin Harvick, had gone the slow and steady approach. If they continue to replicate that, then yeah, 5,800 Josh Berry, just doing the Harvick thing, I could possibly get on board. Obviously, the data is not there to support it, so we're not super pumped. But you're going to have the practice lap-by-lap data, Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, description below or at racefortheprize.com. You'll be able to look at all the laps and see if you can elevate or downgrade Barry. Priest is another interesting guy like Dillon, running up there in the top 15 last season. Not a lot of road course experience, which also makes this very interesting because this is kind of his first real endeavor. I mean, I guess he does have some back in his JTG days. Those are pretty solid numbers. If we look over at where he's finishing in his races, 13th at Sonoma, 15th at Chicago, 17th at Watkins Glen, 11th at the Roval. I know finishing position can be a bit misleading, but in order for him to do that, he's clearly limiting his mistakes. He's clearly going out there and staying in the game. He hasn't quite hit big yet, but for 5,700, a driver that in 4 races last year got a top 20, is very appealing. Now, as we go further down, we're going to see these guys really not spending any time in the top 15. So let's just see if maybe they were out in the top 20. And if they're in the top 20, they were also, again, in striking distance. See, LaJoie, not quite as successful as Preece. But, again, for him to have 5 top 20s, his time hasn't come. And, yeah, it could be a bit of a challenge for him to get into the top 10, very deep in the top 25, if we're considering Corey LaJoie. But he could do it. If we're looking for drivers that are not screwing up as much, LaJoie is not screwing up. Stenhouse had 3 of them last year. He was optimal, I believe, in 2 of the 3, maybe all 3. But if we know anything about Stenhouse, it's a guy that can make mistakes. But again, he may just change his approach and go out there and say, all right, I'm not going to win. I'm going to try to stay focused for 70 laps or whatever and get this thing done. Maybe that's what he did last year. It's really hard, though, to imagine Stenhouse not making mistakes, not getting fired up, and losing spots. But he did do it 3 times, and 3 times he didn't do it. So those are some of the drivers that we're going to want to consider, key in on. Clearly, the place that we are really, really attracted is going to be, I think, Preece offers a lot of value early in the week. Dillon is someone that I think I can get onto that others may not necessarily be targeting. And then the Bushbone and Logano are really a solid sweet spot. Probably going to carry a lot of ownership as we look for a lineup that is filled out by, you're going to have your elite drivers at the top. But picks 3 through 6 can be top 10s with place differential. And one of these guys is not going to qualify well. Maybe all of them. They could all slide in the optimal lineup. These guys may not offer as much place differential, although Buescher could. Buescher, McDowell, Chastain, Cindric. But they also offer a little bit more upside. And in offering a better finishing position, we can sacrifice a little bit of place differential. Suarez, too. I really think Suarez is very intriguing. That's where I'm going for value this week. Thanks for joining me here on the Fantasy NASCAR podcast, brought to you by RaceForThePrize.com. Blessed to have you guys support. I love all you guys and gals. I think like 1 gal watches, 2 gals maybe. Trip to Life, fantastic.